Today's headlines tell a harrowing story of a world gone mad. As I read these headlines, I sometimes wonder how many people recall another astounding era in our recent history, ushered in by a similar period of world madness. It was a dangerous, lawless, high-tension era that will grow more and more incredible with each passing year, until someday people will say it never could have happened at all. At the time, I was writing a column for a New York newspaper, so I covered the most fantastic episode in American history, the Roaring Twenties. Now, those amazing days are recreated for you in Warner Brothers' vivid picturization of that dynamic period. In 1920, Prohibition arrived, and a country just recovering from the war jitters fell into a new delirium. The bootlegger sprang into being. Overnight, he switched the nation's mind from battles to bottles. An evasion of the law became the new national pastime. College students, yes, even high school kids and flappers, joined the mad party, and the jazz age was born. Suddenly, frenzy reached Wall Street, and the stock market whirled to dizzy heights. Millionaires bloomed at every stage door. The nightclubs were packed with delirious, free-spending thrill hunters. Money poured into the coffers of the underworld, to be fought over and stained with blood.
Could you guess? You ever lie in bed at night and say, I wonder how many men I've killed?
Well, sometime I've counted them up, but I'm not going to tell you. Okay?
What difference does it make?
There was a few people killed in the robberies I was in. They claimed when I was arrested, they accused me of killing 14 of them at various stages.
You would have been an accessory. Anyhow, and that's just as much.
If that was it, that would have been good. I mean, I wouldn't have been so upset about these charges, but for some reason or another, they'd always say that it was me that did the shooting.
The gang was founded by Fred Barker and Alvin Karpis.
Fred invited Karpis to meet his mother. Alvin Karpis and Ma Barker were a perfect match. Their meeting began an era of crime unmatched in fantastic violence.
What's the saxophone for, Al? You taking up music?
In a way, this kind of music's gonna be our ticket to the better life. Meet Baby.
Wow, what a saxophone.
Make way for a music lover. Al, can you really shoot this thing?
I can make it talk, Ma. It'll tell any cop that gets in my way he made a bad mistake.
They were later joined by Fred's brother, Arthur, also known as Doc Barker. Besides the three core members, the supporting network of criminal associates included at least 25 members. Although the Barker-Karpis gang was not as notorious as their contemporaries, such as the Dillinger gang or the Barrow gang, the Barker-Karpis gang was in fact much more ruthless. In 1931, the gang began robbing banks. In the course of one robbery, they killed Sheriff Calvin Roy Kelly in West Plains, Missouri.
Here in New Orleans, Alvin Karpis was captured with J. Edgar Hoover directing after a nationwide search. Karpis was afraid of fingerprints. Here's the G-Man record. He had the tips of his fingers sliced by a knife. No use. His fingerprint characteristics identified him just the same. He had his face lifted, his ears clipped, but look at his eyes, same old creepy.
Although director J. Edgar Hoover personally claimed credit for Karpis's arrest, Hoover and the official FBI account of the arrest remains in question. Karpis offers his own version of the arrest in his book, The Alvin Karpis Story.
Well, all I can say about this is that if that version of my arrest is any criteria, you know, as to the rest of the contents of this book, oh boy, they should put it right on a shelf for fairy tales, because that's what that book is about. If it's no more accurate, the rest of it, than the way they described my capture in New Orleans.
The arrest of Karpis brought the FBI to fame and skyrocketed their public standing, alongside with J. Edgar Hoover's personal reputation. The Barker-Karpis gang was one of the longest-lived criminal gangs of the Depression era. The Barker-Karpis gang was active from 1931 to 1935. They fled to Joplin and then to St. Paul, Minnesota, where Jewish-American organized crime boss Harry Sawyer, born Harry Sandlovich, found them a house at 1031 Roberts Road, owned by Helen Hanegraaff. They used the alias Anderson, but a few weeks later, Helen's son Nick recognized Fred and Alvin's photos in a copy of True Detective magazine, and he contacted the police.
Something had to be done, and the task fell to the Bureau of Investigation under the command of J. Edgar Hoover. The 5 most wanted criminals were quickly dubbed America's Most Wanted, and they were Al Capone, John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, Babyface Nelson, and Alvin Karpis.
Karpis, Nelson, and the others moved into the Sioux Falls Bank. Right on schedule. They took their places. Right on schedule. The vault was open. Right on schedule. Shooting the cop was not on the schedule.
Everything's under control here. Take your time.
They collected $50,000 and made their getaway right on schedule. I was right proud of them.
December 1932, we robbed a bank in Minneapolis. And again, we knew the guy had hit the button, you know, an alarm. Well, we already had a guy outside with a machine gun standing by a mailbox. This was a building like this, where, you know, a kind of a triangle building on the corner. Well, when the squad car rolled up there, by then another fellow went out and got a machine gun out of the car to help. And when this squad car came up there, it was about 18 below, 20 below zero, and you couldn't see how many cops were in the car or anything. So these guys just automatically opened up. And we could hear the other squad cars coming with the sirens blowing and so forth. And so these 2 cops never got a chance to do any shooting. We didn't know there was 2 or 4 or 5 or what. And one of these fellows that ran out there to help, in his haste and eagerness, he hit an icy place on the street and he fell. And when he fell, he was pulling the trigger and he shot down one of our back tires. We had a big Lincoln sedan. So then when we got out there, the shooting was over with.
We've got complete information now on the shooting of Sheriff Kelly in Missouri. Fred Barker has been positively identified as one of the 2 men who gunned him down. The other man is new to the Barker gang. His name is Alvin Karpis.
What do we know about Mr. Karpis?
Full name, Francis Alvin Karpis. Born August 10th, 1908. At age 17, convicted of burglary, sentenced to 10 years at the State Industrial Reformatory in Hutchinson, Kansas. Escaped March 9th, 1929, later arrested for auto theft and safe blowing. Released from Kansas State Prison May of last year.
Strange eyes. Almost hypnotic. We'll see if we can spare a few more men to the Midwest field offices.
Yes, sir.
The Barker Karpis gang is renowned for its long-running myth that the activities of the gang were actually run and controlled by the Barker brothers' mother, Kate, usually referred to as Ma Barker.
As the armored car reaches this point, I come tearing out of here like I'm out of control. I cut in ahead of him.
And the guards kill you with machine guns fire.
Now, who'd shoot an innocent old lady all alone in her car?
The matter of fact is, no one ever heard of her until after she had been slaughtered by the F.B.I. down in Florida down in 1935. And then they built her up over the years gradually as a monster. The truth of the matter was, she's an old religious, one of those holy roller religious type from the Ozarks. She never read newspapers. The only thing she listened to on the radio was hillbilly program, and her greatest pastime was working jigsaw puzzles. And as far as knowing that we were criminals, yes, she knew we were criminals.
But you were one of her boys, though, weren't you? Just the same as Doc and Freddie?
Yeah, that's right.
The world of organised crime in the Midwest was a fairly small network of people, and as a result, Hollywood had the problem of how did you depict the social interaction between these gangsters, looking at a film such as Ma Barker's Killer Brood. The device used by the filmmakers was to introduce these characters to each other in a soiree with music and entertainment.
Al! So you made it.
I told you I would.
Ma, this here's Al Karpis.
Hi, Ma.
Well, Al Karpis, I'm glad to see you. Fred's told me a lot about you, and if it's half as good as he says, you're okay in my book.
What'd he tell you? I was a fine, upstanding citizen?
Ma, imagine this guy. When we were in prison, he organizes a Boy Scout troop to help him shovel coal, huh, Al?
Yeah. They did their good turn.
Have you located yet, Al?
No, not yet.
Why don't you come in with us? Huh, Ma?
Sure, Al, sure. We'd be glad to have you.
Huh. Where are your boys, Ma?
Oh, well, it's Lloyd over there, and Doc and Herman are out on business.
Oh.
So they should have been back a long time ago. Fred, go get Al a drink.
Hollywood, of course, soon realised that there was huge money to be made from making movies about the gangsters. The problem for a movie maker, of course, is that they have to tell the story in 70 or 80 minutes. So there was a need to use dramatic elements in order to make the characters appear far worse than they were in real life. Other times, those dramatic devices could be a bit strange, to say the least. Karpis, of course, was an associate of the Barker gang, but that was just one of the many gangs that were operating in the Midwest. And Hollywood very quickly used these people as a vehicle to sell movie tickets, with the result that we end up with some quite bizarre scenes, such as the one in Ma Barker's Killer Brood, where we see Machine Gun Kelly, John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd and Alvin Karpis all in the same scene.
Why, Kelly! Hello.
Huh?
Cut out the hearts and flowers. Ma, we knew this was your job. We know how you work. All right, boys.
Lou, are you pulling another Jackson boner?
I bubbled that. But this time I've got you outsmarted.
Oh, my, it does look bad, don't it? What's your proposition?
We kind of figured to take Courtney off your hands, Mom.
Are you offering any cash?
Of course we are. Lou figured we'd pay about...
Not 1 red cent.
But, honey, you said 50 grand.
That was before we found Ma alone.
I never heard of such a thing. Trying to steal another mob's kidnap. Why, it ain't honest.
You're in no spot to refuse, Ma.
Do you want to gamble on that? Red?
That's a pretty low card, Ma.
Maybe I better draw another. Karpis!
You better draw your limit, Ma, and fast. I'm losing patience.
Baby face Nelson. And if Fred and Karpis and Babyface and me ain't enough, then I got a wild card. A real wild card. Johnny Dillinger.
Fives beat fours. I'd say Ma has the best hand.
After this, folks will be calling you Pop Gun Kelly.
St. Paul, the capital city of Minnesota, had a very bizarre history of mismanagement around crime. In 1900, former Irish chief of police called John O'Connor introduced a system whereby criminals from other states were allowed to remain in St. Paul provided they didn't commit any more violent crimes. I can't think of a bigger abuse of a public position than to allow that. But if nothing else, it meant the people in St. Paul were not subject to extreme violence. However, prohibition was deeply resented by many ordinary Americans. As a result, an underground network of illicit drinking dens sprang up. Speakeasies.
The speakeasies were run by gangsters, and they appeared in every city throughout America. As you can imagine, people talk. Speakeasies needed customers. It was therefore impossible to conceal the existence of these places. The only way a speakeasy could continue in business was to use corruption. They had to bribe the police in order that they wouldn't be closed down. There is no way an illicit drinking den could remain a secret. The customers would talk. The speakeasy itself needed to attract customers. So this idea that there was somehow these places in the back streets that nobody knew about is completely wrong. Speakeasies were not all just backstreet den. Many were quite grand establishments that had music and dancing. Others took the form of illicit casinos where there was gambling, roulette, and all of the kind of things you would expect to find in Monaco. However, what was the distinguishing factor was that you could get booze in all of them. In order to protect themselves, of course, the gangsters who ran the speakeasies knew what they had to do, and what they had to do was to bribe corrupt officials.
However, what was the distinguishing factor was that you could get booze in all of them, but they needed to protect themselves. Of course, the gangsters who ran the speakeasies knew what they had to do. They had to bribe officials. With the police in their pocket, the gangsters always had advance notice of when there would be a police raid. The result was that all of the booze was cleared out and the club looked innocent when the police arrived. It was soon estimated that the illicit booze trade was worth $3 billion in untaxed income.
There were two main factors which shaped the world of crime in America in the 20s and the 30s. There was, of course, the Great Depression, but on top of that, there was the whole business of prohibition. The first of the two factors came about in 1920 with the imposition of the Volstead Act. In January 1920, the Volstead Act became law, and sales of alcohol were prohibited throughout America. Prohibition lasted for 13 years, from 1920 right through to 1933. Over 1,500 federal agents were tasked with locating and destroying stocks of illegal alcohol.
First thing you know, I was running errands for them pimps and gamblers and carrying booze for the bootleggers, and instead of making a cent a paper, I'd come home maybe midnight, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning with $1.50, $2 in my pocket, but I'd have much more than that. I'd hide.
Did you feel like a big shot?
Sure I did. What kid wouldn't at 10 years old? Come on, I had more money than any kid in the neighborhood.
During the 20s and 30s, a crime wave swept America that was so intense that characters such as Alvin Karpis felt they could commit the most heinous crimes with absolute impunity. Under Hoover's command, the Bureau of Investigation, which later in 1933 became the FBI, fought a long and difficult war against gangsters and also corrupt individuals who covered and concealed the gangsters and protected them from the law.
Arthur Barker had been serving a life sentence for the murder of night watchman Thomas J. Sherrill. But in 1932, he was paroled from Oklahoma State Penitentiary and immediately joined the Barker Karpis gang. Many others rotated in and out of the gang, including Chicago outfit mobsters Fred Goetz and Volney Davis.
Vic, I want you to pour it on. I want the Barkers and Alvin Karpis. Use pressure, more pressure than they ever dreamed possible. Now start leaning on their friends and relatives hard. I want them to see agents on every corner. I want them to be afraid to eat or sleep. I want them so hot that no crook in the country will dare hide them. I want them on the run. Right out in the open.
No doubt about it.
Perfect match. Doc Barker, convicted of attempted robbery and murder, sentenced to life imprisonment, now out on parole. Doc Barker, out on parole. Fred Barker, out on parole. Alvin Karpis, out on parole. They're all parolees except Ma.
Ma. That's what I call my mother.
Well, don't get sentimental about this one. It could kill you.
All right, Pop.
All right, down on the floor. Out of the pen. Don't anybody move now. Here. All right, let's get the phone.
Damn.
Alvin!
It was a senseless slaughter. 3 innocent people murdered following the robbery of the 3rd Northwestern Bank of Minneapolis.
The gang continued their bank robbing activities until mid-1933, when they decided that robbing banks was becoming risky, and so therefore they decided to diverge into the field of kidnapping.
Ma, Al, I just got the word. Guess who wants to join us on a big job?
Who wants to join us?
Probably some two-bit hood.
Wrong. Dillinger. Dillinger. Not only him, but Babyface Nelson, Van Meter, and Green. They want Ma to pick the job and plan it.
How about it, Ma?
Later. I got other plans.
But it'd be a natural.
We're leaving the bank business. Temporarily. As of now, we're kidnappers.
Kidnappers? Are you crazy? Up to now, only the state and local cops are looking for us. As long as we stay out of their jurisdiction, we're safe.
Doc's right, Ma. Kidnapping will bring in the F.B.I.
The F.B.I. College boys. Get one of them in front of a machine gun. His hide's no tougher than the local laws.
Mom's right.
Their graduation to more serious crime was overseen and protected by the corrupt actions of Big Tom Brown. On June 15th, 1933, the Barker Karpis gang kidnapped William Ham of Ham's Brewery and released him on June 19th, 1933. The ransom from his kidnapping netted $100,000. Emboldened by their success, they then kidnapped Edward Brumner in daylight in St. Paul in January 1934, releasing him in February. The ransom from that kidnapping turned out to be $200,000. However, the kidnappings brought too much negative publicity, and Alvin Karpis was declared public enemy number 1, which brought down the full force of the FBI on the Barker Karpis gang. St. Paul's corrupt chief of police, Thomas Brown, tipped the Barkers off, and they left town.
Hoover's agents quickly became known as the G-men, short for government men, but they were more widely known as the Untouchables. J. Edgar Hoover was appointed acting head of the Bureau of Investigation in 1924.
There is nothing mysterious about the manner in which the Federal Bureau of Investigation works. Its formula is a simple one: intensive training, carefully investigated and highly efficient personnel, plus rigid requirements in regard to conduct, intelligence, and integrity. A special agent must be a good marksman and have the courage to shoot it out with the most venomous of public enemies. He must know how to take fingerprints and what to do with them afterwards. He must know that no clue, no matter how seemingly unimportant, can be overlooked. He must have constantly before him the fact that science is a bulwark of criminal investigation, and he must realize that no case ever ends for the Federal Bureau of Investigation until it is solved and closed with the conviction of the guilty or the acquittal of the innocent.
F.B.I. Fidelity, bravery, integrity. And there's the war map. Pins tagged with the names of special agents and placed where the agents are.
Mr. Jolson, I think it's going to be necessary to enlarge the detail of agents at Little Rock, Arkansas. So consequently, I think we will have to transfer 2 agents from St. Louis into Little Rock, selecting Agent Bush and Agent Hardy for that detail.
From here, headquarters controls the army of G-men, the teletype, absolutely secret communication, directing the work of the 37 field divisions of the FBI. In touch likewise with hundreds of police departments everywhere. Over this teletype were sent the orders in the hunt for Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, Pretty Boy Floyd, the Barker Karpis mob, and those other notorious public enemies. Now the criminal records. Here they receive fingerprint inquiries from local police authorities at the rate of 4,000 a day. Somebody arrested somewhere. What's his record? Is he a fugitive from justice? His fingerprints are sent to the FBI. The experts conduct a search. The prints sent in are in all 10 fingers. They are searched against 10-finger records. There are more than 6.5 million sets of these on file, so classified that the right one can be identified in less than 3 minutes. There are fingerprints on the glass to clinch the conviction. The FBI costs $5 million a year, while the amount of fines, savings, and recoveries of property exceeds $35 million a year. And now the telltale fingerprint is enlarged 400 times on a screen for the detailed study and comparison in avenging the cruel murder of Oscar. Remember that half-eaten apple? Teeth marks in it. They use moulage to study that. Moulage is a kind of paste that hardens and makes a perfect reproduction of objects. John Hamilton, brains of the Dillinger gang, shot by the G-men, died later and was buried by the mob in corrosive lye. When the G-men found the body, it could only be identified by his teeth and dental work. Teeth mean much to the skilled investigator. The footprint at the scene of the crime, reproduced by a plaster cast. This might be the mark left by any one of the 12,000 murderers who kill each year in the United States. They do this same thing with the marks of tire treads. Then the plaster cast is matched with FBI blueprints of every known tire tread design. Moulage reproduction is so perfect, you can hardly tell the copy from the original.
There are 3 needs in America today in law enforcement: the elimination of politics from law enforcement, emphasis on efficiency, and cooperation between police agencies. We should all be concerned with but one goal: the eradication of crime. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is as close to you as your nearest telephone. It seeks to be your protector in all matters within its jurisdiction. It belongs to you.
And despite its many successes, the Bureau had its critics, and Hoover came under intense criticism from a Senate inquiry. Agents didn't have all the technology which is at our disposal today. They had to rely exclusively almost on information provided by the public, and sometimes that information could be very unreliable indeed. And as a result, you would often find agents getting sent off to far-flung places on which turned out to be a complete wild goose chase.
In 1936, J. Edgar Hoover came under intense scrutiny from a US Senator called Kenneth McKellar.
The futile hunt for Karpis brought pressures from well-meaning but now skeptical sources.
I also want to bring to the attention of this Senate Appropriations Committee the increasing workload on our special agents. Under our present budget, unassigned cases are mounting.
Mr. Hoover, I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but I wonder if you'd satisfy my curiosity. Where did you learn your business? From the department itself?
Yes, sir. I was a special assistant to the Attorney General for about 8 years, handling prosecutions. I was appointed director of the Bureau in 1924.
You never attended any school yourself?
I took degrees of LLB and LLM from George Washington University.
Oh, no. I'm talking about crime school. Have you ever attended any such school?
No, sir. The training program at the Bureau was not initiated until 1928. As director of the Bureau, I initiated that program.
So, whatever you know about it, you learn right there in the department?
I learned firsthand. Yes, sir.
Have you ever made an arrest?
The point which McKellar honed in on was the fact that J. Edgar Hoover had never actually personally captured a leading criminal. That really stung. And J. Edgar Hoover declared in response to that he would personally go out and capture public enemy number one, Alvin Karpis. Hoover was as good as his word. On the 1st of May 1936, a large number of FBI agents surrounded the car driven by Alvin Karpis. Karpis was arrested. Karpis himself tells a very different story and account of his capture, and this is what Karpis had to say.
I say this, that 28 agents arrested me, and while even they were, well, to put it mildly, a bit excited, most of them. And one was shouting, "Put your hands up." Another one, "Keep your hands down." Another one, "Sit on the running board."
This was in New Orleans?
Yeah, right. Yeah, about 5 in the evening. And there was a fellow behind me with the rifle, and he was so shaky that in the excitement, he wasn't scared, don't misunderstand me.
You mean you could feel the barrel vibrating up against your back?
Yeah, he couldn't hold it still, so I asked the man in front of me with a machine gun. He seemed to be the coolest of the lot. I said, "Who's the boss of this outfit anyway?" And he said, "Oh, he'll be here in a minute. Why?" And I said, "Well, I want him to tell that guy with the rifle back at me to get it out of my back because he's so nervous I think he's going to shoot right through me and right through you if he does shoot." And this got the guy a little upset. He heard me say that, and he said, "Well, you son of a bitch, when we get you to the office, I'm going to show you who the boss is." And I turned my head like that to answer him. And as I did, up at the corner of the apartment building, this was on the corner, I see a guy peeping around the corner. And I thought, what the hell is this? And when I stopped talking, these other agents that were right close to me, they started looking to see what I was looking at, why I had quit talking. And finally, here came another one around the corner, looking around the corner. One of the agents shouted, "We got him, Chief, we got him. Come on, everything's all right, we got him." So here they came, and it turned out to be the Gold Dust Twins, as they were known in those days, Hoover and Clyde Tolson.
Crime is like cancer. It spreads its tendrils to envelop everybody who is involved in that particular area of crime. Once a police officer, lawman, or a civil servant had been bribed, they of course fell under the spell of the crooks. And they were trapped forever. Once you take that money, you were in their pocket. You couldn't ever leave. They were now effectively on the payroll, and those trapped in the web of the crooks became the engine for generating more and more crime.
The most famous example of a corrupt police officer is, of course, Big Tom Brown. He was the chief of police in St. Paul, Minneapolis, at the time when the Barker gang and Alvin Karpis were hiding out. It's ironic that Big Tom Brown was a former head of what was known as the Purity Squad, and the Purity Squad was there to root out corruption in public life. His job was to shut down the illicit gambling dens, the brothels, and the speakeasies. In reality, he did exactly the opposite. He very quickly formed relationships with the criminals and took money from them in order that they could continue with their crimes. It's astonishing to realise that Big Tom Brown facilitated crime in St. Paul in return for a share of the money. However, in his desire to make much more money, along comes Big Tom Brown, and he decides he will allow violent crime in St. Paul, provided he gets a cut of the income. It's a bizarre situation, it's wrong, and it almost defies belief that such a thing could happen in America.
The gang had already faced problems due to the mob's dislike of their high-profile activities. Gang member George Shotgun Ziegler had been gunned down in Cicero, Illinois in March of 1934. Gang member William J. Harrison was killed on January 6 by fellow members of the gang. Following the FBI notice that Alvin Karpis was public enemy number 1 on January 8, 1935, Arthur Barker was arrested, along with Byron Bolton. Arthur Barker was shot dead while attempting to escape in 1939. On January 8, 1935, gang member Russell Slim Gray Gibson was killed resisting arrest. On his dead body was found a map and letters which led the FBI to a cottage near Lake Weir in Florida, near Ocklawaha, in which Fred Barker and his mother Kate, Ma Barker, were hiding under assumed names. After a 4-hour shootout, on January the 16th, 1935, Fred and Ma Barker were killed. Controversy remains as to whether Ma Barker participated in the shootout or was even a criminal at all. Alvin Karpis was nearly gunned down in Atlantic City, New Jersey, around the same time as Ma Barker and Fred, but somehow he managed to shoot his way out and survive. Karpis stayed on the move for another 16 months, pulling an armored car robbery and a train robbery in April and October 1935, before finally being arrested in New Orleans on May 1st, 1936, alongside his new accomplice, Fred Hunter. Doc Barker was sent to Alcatraz in the summer of 1935. Alvin Karpis soon followed upon his arrest. Many other members of the gang also ended up in Alcatraz.
It's hard to explain that to you. Every guy, when he gets in prison, you don't think he's going to stay there long. Something will happen. But in my case, I wasn't kidding myself. The only thing I had going for me there, every year they'd talk about breaking the place up, doing away with it. Well, that kind of kept things going. I didn't think I'd want to try to escape from there. It was just too tough. And I thought, well, if we get transferred, they break the place up, I have a little better shot at it. So over the years, you keep going like that. One thing will give you a little hope in this direction, another one will knock it out, and then something else will occur, and you say, well, maybe. But actually, it was not until 1955 that I even thought I had a ghost of a chance about anything, and only then because the man that came back there is a warden, and he was a fairly decent sort of a guy for a job like that.
Not surprisingly, Brown's continual failure to close the brothels the speakeasies and the gambling establishments under his leadership became notorious. It was a repeated pattern of failure. None of these raids were ever successful, and it was obvious that corruption was involved. However, the reality behind the mask, of course, was that Big Tom Brown was actually cooperating with gangsters. He was their shield, provided they paid him money. They knew they could continue any form of criminal activity in St. Paul. Big Tom was very swiftly on the radar of the FBI when an FBI informant, who was also a speakeasy owner, Frank Riley, explained a number of gangsters had funded Tom Brown's campaign to be elected chief of police.
And these people in return were being awarded monopolies on various types of crime which was being carried out in St. Paul. The cloud of suspicion surrounding Big Tom Brown deepened when two police officers came forward and gave the FBI some very explicit information about the activities of Big Tom Brown. They informed the FBI that Big Tom Brown had granted a monopoly on gambling to one Leon Gleckman. Gleckman was often known as the Al Capone of St. Paul, and he was granted an illicit monopoly on gambling, which he ran from his suite in the St. Paul Hotel. However, although Gleckman could rely on the protection of Big Tom, he was not immune from the attentions of other gangsters, and he was soon kidnapped by two men who were believed to be under the control of a local gangster, Jack Pfeiffer. Chief of Police Big Tom Brown very quickly became involved in the negotiation to release Gleckman, and a ransom of $100,000 was paid over. Almost immediately, however, one of the gangsters was shot dead, and in no time Big Tom Brown was on the scene. The first thing Tom Brown did was to go into the safe of the dead man and take out $100,000, which was the ransom that had been paid for Gleckman.
Big Tom then told everyone that he had taken it back to police headquarters for safekeeping, but the $100,000 was simply never found. It disappeared. By August 1936, however, the case against Big Tom Brown was so strong that there was a public hearing convened by the St. Paul Civil Service Board, and Big Tom was eventually fired from the police force. However, he was never actually tried or indicted for his crimes, and was able to retire and live a quiet life as an ordinary civilian.
While at McNeil Island Penitentiary, Karpis began to teach guitar to a young Charles Manson, then known as Little Charlie. Karpis was paroled in 1969 and deported to Canada. He moved to Spain in 1973. He died on August 30th, 1979, of natural causes. Karpis co-wrote 2 books with professional authors, one released in 1971 titled The Alvin Karpis Story, and another released in 1979 titled On the Rock.
Could the Justice Department have picked a worse place?
I don't believe they could have, because as a matter of fact, they were going to establish it in southeast Alaska. On an island. The Attorney General went over and picked a site. Him and his wife were on an Army transport, and as they came back into the Golden Gate there, they seen this big sign across there, U.S. Disciplinary Barracks. So he inquired around, and they wound up subleasing this thing for 5 years from the Army. But then the propaganda got so great for them, And this thing, you know, it was a big mysterious deal, you know, according to them. And it sort of took the imagination of the news media, the people, and everything. And the first thing you know, it was worth millions to them. And just in propaganda alone. And I might add at this point, it was probably the greatest fraud that was ever put off on the American people for that length of time. I think it lasted about 28 years or so. And they had the American people completely fooled. It was a real bad place, yes. But I would like to make it perfectly clear, I'm not sniveling about my treatment there or anything like that. It's just, it was so unnecessary. When you take a group of men, you deprive them of everything but the fact that they're having their meals and a place to sleep. No newspapers, no radio. Of course, there's people that will say, well, what the hell do they want? What did they get in trouble for if they don't like it? But the government had 20,000 other prisoners that they didn't treat in that manner. So, no, it wasn't necessary.